welcome to GSBA's Rapid Response. My name is Joey Chapman. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the Membership Development Manager for GSBA. Small businesses on Capitol Hill are facing multiple challenges, from COVID-related closures and phased reopenings to the impacts of CHOP and ongoing protests in the neighborhood. Today, our guest Rapid Response moderator, Christina Arrington, Business Development Manager for Capitol Hill Business Alliance, a program of GSBA, will lead us in a conversation with small business owners impacted by these recent happenings. Now, over to Christina.
Thank you, Joey. Good morning. My name is Christina Arrington. I use she, her pronouns. And as Joey mentioned, I am the Business Development Manager for the Capitol Hill Business Alliance. We focus on representing businesses in this neighborhood, which has the highest density of small businesses in the Pacific Northwest. It's the historic home of the LGBTQ community in Seattle, and it's also gained national attention more recently due to CHOP, the Capitol Hill Organized Protest Zone. So as the CHBA, we have been supporting small businesses beginning from COVID and all of the closings and reopenings, but now more recently, CHOP and the protest zone. We have been working with a lot of different stakeholders from the city, many different departments, with small businesses trying to figure out peaceful resolutions. GSBA stands in support of the protesters and against institutional racism and violence that inordinately targets Black and Brown people. And we also recognize how profoundly impacted residents and small businesses have been by the current events. We have received some updates this morning. This is rapid response. We try and keep it as current as possible. The situation going on currently in Capitol Hill, it does change on a daily basis, which is one of the interesting things that small businesses are having to navigate. Is you make a plan and it is so quickly has to be addressed. And so this morning we received information from the mayor's office. They are working to wind down the CHOP as quickly as possible while allowing for protected First Amendment activity. And they are pursuing this on an ongoing basis. We have had many conversations with them. We know that they are in a lot of conversations with protesters and demonstrators to try and figure out what that means to resolve this peacefully. The bigger piece of information from today is that the city is closing Cal Anderson Park at noon today. They're posting notices, announcing it on social media, and parks crews will be on the site to help clean up. And so that is something that is taking place today. I imagine every day there will be new events. We'll see what comes of this. We will figure out how that plays into our conversation, although our conversation today is not entirely about CHOP. That's one element, but there are a lot of other elements that small businesses are trying to navigate. So I will turn it over to our panelists and start by asking each of you to introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, your business, and your role in Capitol Hill. Molly, we'll start with you, and then Wazhma and Diana.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Molly Moon. I own Molly Moon's Homemade Ice Cream. I use she, her pronouns. Molly Moon's has been on Capitol Hill for a little over 11 years. I've had my company, which I started with our Wallingford shop, for a little over 12 years. We were closed during COVID for, I think, a little more than 2 months. So we've just sort of been in the reopening phase for about a month. And as I hope most people know, we are on Pine and 10th. So at the sort of where the western barricade of the CHOP has been.
Wazhma?
Hi, my name's Wazhma Samizay, and I own Retail Therapy. I use the she, her pronoun, and my shop is on the corner of Broadway and Pike. I've had the store for 17 years, almost 18, and have lived and worked in the neighborhood for 25 years.
Hi, I'm Diana Adams, and I own Vermillion Art Gallery and Bar. My pronouns are she, her. and I opened Vermillion 12 years ago so as a way to make art more accessible to different groups. And I highlight as much LGBTQ and BIPOC art as I possibly can. I have a lot of new curators who needed an opportunity to try out getting into the art world, because I personally feel like art saves lives. Art and music is incredibly important for creative self-expression and self-preservation.
If you would go into a little more detail, Diana, about how your business has been impacted over the last few months and how 2020 has been different for you than previous years running your business.
Well, I would say that there have been a lot of changes in the neighborhood, and we've evolved slowly. You know, sometimes they're quicker than others, but this has been a very quick, you know, with COVID, we closed on March 15th, and we haven't been able to be open even part-time because of the structure of my business. I mean, I think I'm more appropriate for phase 3 or 4. So that everything was just kind of in limbo. And then when the protests started, we decided to open up a mutual aid station to support the protesters with water and just simple things like that. And I think we kind of, it was me and Carolyn Hitt and Studio Current, we kind of launched a neighborhood swell of support. And so we did that for about 10 days, and it was pretty intense and violent. And but after those 10 days, so many other places had sprung up, and we sort of set the standard with collecting. We started out collecting water and food, and then next thing you know, we were collecting medical supplies, PPE, and we're educating people, and we're working with private individuals to get porta potties, and then the city stepped in and did that. So that's pretty much where we are right now.
Wazhma, how about you in terms of how you've been impacted?
So we closed just before the mandate was officially placed, partially because I'd been seeing the news for a while, and I have a child who has some health issues that I had to consider, and then we've been closed for 3 months. So we just now, like in the last week and a half, started to look at reopening and what that looks like as a retail space, taking into consideration like both how I keep myself safe as well as the community. So that's a big part of what we've taken on. And really, because we are dealing with a completely unknown series of events between the pandemic and what's happening over at CHOP. It's really a day-by-day thing that I take on and look to see how to make things work.
Molly.
Well, first of all, I mean, I feel like COVID has been devastating on small businesses. And it's been so long that I don't feel like any of us are talking about how devastating it is. Like, I don't think I'll lose my house, but I still might. I don't think my company will go bankrupt, but it still could. And you know, retail therapy is an institution. Molly Moons is an institution. Vermillion is an institution in this neighborhood. And we're all at risk. Like, I think I had almost no cash flow for weeks. And then I am lucky enough that I was able to launch a grocery program. And so we, about maybe 3 weeks into the pandemic, got Pints in PCC, which has been an amazing local partner. And I already shopped there sometimes, but now I'm like, I'm never going anywhere else for groceries other than PCC. And Metropolitan Market has also been incredible. And so we were able to launch Pints and bring in cash flow to keep paying the chefs and ice cream makers to make the ice cream, and like just barely keep the wheels on the bus. And I think every small business, while we waited to see if we were going to get federal funding in March and April, while we waited to see if our employees were going to be taken care of, like, we threw a couple of fun merch items online, and the Pints have been able to continue to pay the health insurance for everybody on our team that's been laid off. But I know so many people, small business owners, who've had to stop paying for health insurance for their employees that of course they want to bring back. And it's just, I feel like it's almost impossible to articulate the chasm that the virus has created. And so to layer on that the neighborhood has been disrupted by, really, I think the biggest culprit is Fox News. Like, the things that people read about the neighborhood and what's happening are not what's happening. And the things people see on Fox, and I have relatives from all over the country calling and being like, are you okay? Because yeah, I also live in Capitol Hill and have lived in Capitol Hill for 20 some years. And it's like, you know, relatives from Idaho, or yes, we're fine. And in fact, it's fine to go get a scoop of ice cream on Pine Street right there. And it's fine to walk through, and it's fine to participate in what's going on in CHOP. And I think it's been such a disservice to our neighborhood. Not to say that I think CHOP is the best thing that's ever happened to Pine Street, but I think it's it has been a really important part of the movement for Black lives. I think it has made other activism possible. And, but I think the media around it has been really hard for the businesses right around it. I know, Elliott Bay is just having a terrible time, and they really want to be able to do what it sounds like Wazhma is doing, but it's just so difficult when customers don't even want to come to the area, whether or not it's safe because of how it's being portrayed in the news.
Diana, I know you had a lot of involvement with the demonstrations as they began at the end of May. Does that seem to resonate in terms of what your experience is? I think that your location is also very much within that CHOP space. Does it resonate, both the devastation of coronavirus on your business, but then also through the protests and the SPD response and now CHOP, how have you seen that changed? And do you think that it is currently understood and well represented in the media?
Well, I actually happen to live across the street from the precinct also. So, I mean, this is 24/7 for me.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm also a full-time caregiver for my father. He's 77, and we're living in a studio apartment, basically like diagonal from the police station. It's definitely interesting. I mean, I see all sides of it. And so I agree with Molly. I mean, it's misportrayed. And it depends on what day you ask me what my opinion is. Most of the time, like 95% of the time, I feel like it's incredibly important, informative, and progressive, and like, world changing in a lot of ways. Even with the faults, we get to see human nature at its best and worst and most innovative. And that really is exciting to me, to see how people try to figure out interpersonal relationships and how they adapt and how they can teach each other. And, with the murder though, 2 days ago, I mean, now I'm kind of a little, hesitant to endorse the whole picture, mostly because I'm really disappointed with the way the city has responded from the beginning. And, we have all felt like the police department intentionally kind of, pushed the violence down to our street, 11th Avenue and Pike, between Pike and Pine. I mean, that could be intentional or, subjective or not unintentional. It's just that, a lot of the other business owners on this street have felt like sort of second-class citizens. And then, so this, is a prime example of like how we've been impacted. But, even still, everybody that's impacted is supportive. We really want to see systemic change. And my most recent criticism is that the city has had an opportunity with CHOP for, at least in the second half of it, to get on the ground with mental health counselors and aid stations or just any kind of outreach, and there has been zero that I can see. Saturday was supposed to be outreach in the park with mental health counselors and homeless advocacy and, transitioning people into a healthier permanence rather than living on the street, living in the park and being fed by each other or neighbors. And I literally have not seen anybody or heard anything. And that's what should be on the news is, some marketing that's showing that the city actually has a way to turn this into a microcosm of what everybody's asking for, which is like mutual, like humanitarian aid to solve the problems that have been in this neighborhood since I've been in business and since I moved here in the 90s. People are still homeless and hungry and they're drug addicted, and like we show as much compassion as we possibly can as business owners. I know that Wazhma has folks come in and, if they need to take a rest, or I let them use the bathroom, or, but it's really not our job to be like these ambassadors of health when we're just trying to like keep our businesses open to benefit the greater good. And so that's just my opinion about that right now.
I think that's a really great point, that these issues are not new. I think that it has come up in previous conversations. And Wazhma, I know that we've talked about this before, that it feels like a complexity of multiple interlocking issues that are happening right now. That makes it really complicated to get to the core or to have some clarity in how we talk about it, but also obscures the depth of the problems. Can you talk about what some of those issues are and how you see them being connected?
For me, it's really, just going back to what Molly said earlier, we need to just start telling the truth to ourselves and each other, that there's an enormous amount of grief that's there too. And from a philosophical perspective, I feel like for generations, American culture has been used to shoving grief to some corner that it can't be seen, so that we can continue to elevate the idea of the American dream. But the substance of that to support that and the safety nets to support that have just not been there. So we're dealing with poverty. Obviously, that's a massive issue. We're dealing with mental health. That's a second issue all on its own. We're dealing with racism. That's its own category. And homophobia and justice and equity. And then we're dealing with health, which kind of coincides with pandemic, right? Like the pandemic is a piece that came on, but it's not something that wasn't there. And the baseline of what I think the focus has to go back to, which is part of what I think Diana was talking about, the thing that we saw that was great about what came out of CHOP initially was the mutual aid concept, and that's what the community needs. And we needed that before. We needed it before to deal with the homeless crisis and the drug addiction and the things that we think we're paying for through our taxes, which is to take care of the baseline community and the structure. And we just don't have that. Like, that's not happening. So, and for the last, I would, say 3 years, the city has continued to shove the issue from corner to corner, never really actually dealing with it. So if we have a tent city situation in the middle of Cal Anderson right now, it's really no surprise to me because it's been under every other bridge and it's been on the corners of the ID, and the city keeps trying to sweep it. Like, oh, let's sweep this corner today. Well, okay, but where are those folks gonna go? And as a business who's supposed to open my doors to the public and then also stay safe, I have to be conscious of the fact that people don't have a place to wash their hands. They don't have access or the fortitude or even like the mental state to think I should wear a mask, protect myself and protect others. And it's not just in the homeless population. It's even like outside of that. There's this denial of what's actually happening right now. And that's a big part of what we have to contend with as a city to really make anything shift at all. You know, like, yes, the city's going to come through and close Cal Anderson Park. Okay, well, you've just closed another space again where people can gather or people can be in. Where are they going to go? They will find a new place to go to. So that's the part that I think is continuously not being dealt with also.
I think it's really interesting how you talk about grief and then also denial. I think that that's really relevant in a lot of different areas, but definitely around just the devastation of coronavirus and then racial equity in the Black Lives Matter movement of the grief of the violence that has continually taken place and then not knowing how to move forward with that. Molly, you've been in, your location has been in a space where you've experienced some of that. How has your staff processed that to your customers, your community around? How does that seem like it's influencing the, how you are open and moving forward?
Sorry, how does what?
Well, all of the events that are taking place, and then also how to process that. It is devastating. How are you handling trying to move forward? But then also how, I know that you were on the corner of some of the violence that took place last week, and it brought a lot of attention to your store and your staff. Is that having an impact on how you're doing your business and how your staff is in that space?
So to speak to the young boy Lorenzo's death that did happen right basically in front of our shop. I mean, that has just been so sad. And I am only a couple degrees of separation from his mother. And there's a manager in my company who is a friend of mine who has been comforting his mother. I've met his family members as they've brought flowers and prayer posters to his memorial in front of our shop. It's actually right in front of the perfume store on the corner. I mean, what can you say? A teenager is lost and a whole family lost their child. That's been really hard for all of us. And I have 2 kids, and I also lost a sister who was 22. So, you know, close to his age, who's 19. It's just so sad. And I think something that, a thing that we have processed in my work community is that violence is not unique. It felt somewhat unique on the corner of 10th and Pine, but that violence was related to a previous dispute, it sounds like. It had really nothing to do with CHOP, other than that's where those kids happened to be that night. And I had a really hard time figuring out, at one day, a lot of my team wanted to close our Capitol Hill shop and like keep it closed after he was killed. And I really struggled with responding to that request. I, of course, want to honor my team and what they want to do. And that's how I've guided most of our decisions, has been pretty consensus driven decision making throughout COVID. But I really thought, if that had happened in Columbia City, near our shop on Rainier Avenue, and things like that have happened very close to our Columbia City shop in the last 3 years, I don't think we would have closed the shop. And so I was kind of bringing up to my work community, like, does this feel different because it's a primarily white neighborhood and it's a gentrified neighborhood? And do we feel unsafe because more of you on the Capitol Hill team are white or are not Black, and the Columbia City team, never asked for anything like that in the past when there have been shootings near that shop? They've asked for other resources and other support from the company. But so that was a really interesting conversation where we were confronted with our own ideas about safety and race. And we needed to take a look at ourselves internally and ask ourselves, like, what is our motivation here? And, is closing this business's doors in this neighborhood an equitable decision? Or does it have something to do with bias? So we kept the shop open. We adjusted the hours a little bit, but I encouraged everyone to keep the shop open, and in huge part because I think we all, as a business community and a neighborhood of people who live there, we need to be open a little bit and be supporting each other. And I called Linda Dershing, who owns Oddfellows, and I called Hallie upstairs at the Tin Table and Century Ballroom, and I said, what do you think? I want to stay open a little bit. I don't want to put boards back on the windows. I want to tell the neighborhood that we're here for them if they can be safe and we can be safe, which I think we can. Sorry, my answers are really long.
They're fantastic. I think, have the others felt tension between trying to explain and navigate that it is really safe and this is focused on racial equity and Black Lives Matter, and then also the complexity of the fact that there are other elements to it that are not that straightforward? Have you had to talk to a lot of media or folks, or try to explain this is the reality and hold multiple truths at the same time?
I can speak a little bit to that because I think I have a similar philosophy as Molly. When I opened, part of why I opened was to really push back against the Fox narrative. Like, the idea of how I'm going to navigate things through the pandemic was a separate thing, right? Like, we closed earlier than most folks for that reason, right? And then at the same time now, it's like, when the week of the strike happened, I felt like absolutely it was important for me to be open and have my doors open and be there and also tell people, hey, this is not what it looks like. And even yesterday, it's hard. It's really hard to think about a kid who's been killed a block away. When I came to my store yesterday, on my block, everything was peaceful. It was quiet. It felt very normal. Some little kids were laughing at our boarded up mural picture because we have a new painting up. So I hadn't logged on. I had no clue what was happening. And then to read that, it just struck me how the viewpoint is everything, from one block to the next. And that's an act of grace too that we give ourselves to stand in the space and say, okay, we balance these things. We balance the space of grief, and we also balance the space of being open and being in community. And like Diana said, it shouldn't be our job to do that, but in the vacuum and in the absence of what the city is doing, that's what we are doing just to keep whole what we've lived into for the last decade, right? like the shootings at Cal Anderson, and that's part of what I keep trying to think about too, is shootings were happening at Cal Anderson before last year, and they were not given the focus, the attention, or the need that they needed to have the way that this year has.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's strategic. Like, you know, that again, I think that fault still lies with the city, because they want people to say, oh yeah, this whole thing should be moved out of the way so we get some peace. But it's not dealing with the fundamental issue of gun violence in the city. It just isn't. So trying to sort that out is also a big piece of how we're having to operate. Like whenever I keep my doors open, I try to think about, okay, like what's happening for Diana, and what's happening for Molly, and what's happening for Retrofit, or, you know, any of the other folks. You know, one of the things that I think makes this also an amazing community is we do have an incredible amount of women-owned businesses that have really always stood both for, yes, we run our businesses and we're trying to make money and have an independent way of living, but we also are engaged in how to make a difference in that same community. And losing all those spaces is a huge deal. It's not some small thing. And that's where we also need help, you know, like how do we hold these safe spaces, not just here, but throughout the city?
Diana, I'm curious your thoughts on that as well. And then also your experiences. I feel like you were really close to understanding how the protests shifted over time. And you mentioned the first 10 days, how that was different than before or after. And again, the multiple truths of trying to understand what's going on. Can you share a little bit more about what your experiences are, and then also how you are trying to share the complexity of what you're experiencing?
Well, I agree with everything that Wazhma and Molly have said, you know, especially reminding people that there are a lot more women-owned businesses in this neighborhood, and also queer-owned businesses. There aren't a lot of BIPOC-owned businesses. I mean, you know, it's obviously still a very white neighborhood, and but with regard to the protests, you know, we were just 100% on board with anything that, you know, that was for people's First Amendment rights to speak, you know, to Black Lives Matter, and then the kind of overreaction by the police department, and then all the backpedaling that's happened since. And I think when things shifted, it was just more of like, it was a little bit philosophical. I mean, I really didn't know what was going on with CHOP, or Chaz at that point. But I was, you know, interested in watching. But I would say like the majority of the reason that I stopped doing the mutual aid here was because it's the first time my place had been open since March, and I had volunteers offering to come out of the woodwork, you know, like 25, 30, 40 people that wanted to volunteer. But I felt a responsibility to the dozen who'd been here to not overexpose multiple times, multiple people. And so we were a tight-knit group that had started getting tested on day 3, and just kind of all stuck to our shifts and kind of like running a business every other day, you know. And as time went on, you know, I just realized this is really, we weren't even in phase 2 yet. We were in 1.5, and that was, not enough time had gone by to see what the numbers were going to be like with COVID. So I felt like the outdoor stations were better equipped to handle it, because from what we've learned, you know, being outdoors is a lot less, you're not as likely to have COVID transmission. And that just gave me a chance to think first about our own personal safety, not for me, not carrying home anything that would impact my father. And just gave us I really wanted a chance to experience what was going on. You know, we were in like panic mode for the first 10 days of just survival, you know, trying to survive with, you know, close enough to the front line that we were being exposed to tear gas or smoke bombs. And it's really, you know, you don't realize how traumatic and stressful it is, you know, every day, you know, for 12 or 14 hours, thinking that at the end of the day, somebody that you know and love will be possibly permanently injured or killed. And, you know, with the National Guard in my back alley, basically using that as a staging area, it was just, I don't think people can handle much more than, like, you know, a little bit at a time. But yeah, and I just really wanted to go out and see the beauty of what had as soon as the police left, it was this nice sort of like calm respite from everything. And I think that we all, you know, wanted to sort of breathe a little bit and just sort of recharge our convictions with supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and then, you know, just open our eyes again instead of being hunkered down in here.
We have a question from a business owner in Capitol Hill that is open for any of the three of you to jump in. As a business owner, do you feel like the city has made any outreach to you? And do you recommend certain routes to getting your voice heard as someone who is in the neighborhood all day and employs people and is trying to navigate this yourself?
I'm on the Mayor's Small Business Advisory Council and have been for 2 years or something. And then was also appointed to her Small Business Recovery Task Force, which I haven't participated in very much because I was pretty overwhelmed, like trying to just figure out my own business. So I do have city employees from the mayor's office that reach out to me and let me know what's happening and ask me like for input. And that is, I feel like, you know, that's a lot of privilege I have that I get that direct communication. But have I had influence? I maybe a little bit, but I think I don't really understand the mayor and how their decisions are being made. So yeah, I feel like I've had a little bit of influence and my voice has been heard in the mayor's office. I would say I have a really great relationship with a few city council members. In particular, Teresa Mosqueda has been really wonderful. And I was working with her pretty closely on the Jumpstart Seattle tax initiative. And I'm all for that, and really talked through crafting that plan. And she's been in touch with me really regularly about how Capitol Hill is feeling. So I feel like I have this total place of privilege that I get to talk to people and have relationships with people in City Hall. But I think the response to COVID is very difficult because there's not a ton the city can do. And I think they've done a lot of the things they can do, but so much of what will actually help our businesses is, more federal and state stuff. But they've done I think at the city, they've done a lot. And I don't know if everybody on this call knows, but Councilmember Lewis is about to introduce, or maybe has, no, I think he's waiting because he's still crafting the legal language, but talking about how landlords and banks aren't going to be able to call personal guarantees for small businesses during the emergency, which every small business owner on this call probably knows what that is, but if you own a home and you have assets, some of us have had to basically sign our leases or our bank agreements that if we can't pay our debt payments, they could take our house. And that's a really scary place to be in. And I have a few leases that my home guarantees. So that being able to be off the table temporarily during this state of emergency is something that I know a lot of people in the city are supportive of, and I hope happens. But you know, a lot of what we need, like I'm very concerned about my employees, and I'm very concerned about unemployment in general, and that's a state and federal issue. And I really hope there's a federal continuation of the extra $600 of PUA, because that's going to make a world of difference to our customers too, like to our economy. If people can continue to pay rent and survive in this city and maybe go get an ice cream every once in a while or buy something from Wazhma's store, or, you know, I don't know if you can patronize the arts much on unemployment, but a little bit. So I actually think in terms of COVID, the city has done a pretty good job with what they're able to do. CHOP is a different story, but.
I've felt very supported by the Office of Economic Development. And I've also, I hope as well that the $600 PUA is continued, because that's kind of how I'm paying my rent here. And I also got a grant from Vera Project and from For Culture. So I'm really glad that the arts organizations are able to really carry or take over what I'm not eligible for with federal loans and grants and things like that wouldn't work out for me because of my staff size and business model.
Did you want to add anything, Wazhma?
I mean, I'm in total agreement with both of them. You know, the PUA and the additional funds that people are getting. I mean, I think that's also shifting the conversation about what it means to have a living wage. And a big part of that is the cost of living that people are having to contend with is an impediment. That's been a thing all along, and there needs to be some balance between the two. Whatever grant funding or loans I get to still has to contend with the fact that I have rent to pay and my landlord has whatever mortgage or things that he has to contend with. And so that's also like a state and federal level thing. I think that would be more helpful to us is if we had some way to actually pay for those basic things to sustain us through what is like an unusual set of circumstances. Because anything else, it's just kind of, we're doing this circular thing, right? Like whatever money I get, I give to, let's say, my landlord or my basic bills, and then they pay the bank. And so I feel like everything is ultimately securing the bank. You know, it's not really securing anything else. It's not, if I'm not able to do that, it doesn't secure my landlord, who actually has, you know, for the most part, been supportive of small businesses. It doesn't rectify this position that we're both in. So that's a big piece. And same thing for anyone who is in the service industry. You're not making enough money already, long before this, to try to get from like one paycheck to the next paycheck. And it's not just the amount of money that they're making, it's the cost of food, it's the cost of housing, it's the cost of everyday basic living. So that's a long-term thing that we have to look at, not just a short-term fix.
I do want to say to that point that we went tip-free about 2 years ago and completely changed our pay structure so that we could just take all the inequities of tipping culture out of our business model that had become like more and more extreme over the 10 or 11 years I'd been in business. And I am thanking the universe every day that we did that then, right now, because my employees are making unemployment on their actual compensation that they were receiving before the pandemic, plus the $600. And for people who live on tips, and the other thing, so that's complicated. Unemployment is complicated when you live on tips, but then also as my employees are coming back to work and business is so much less. I mean, I'm doing 46% of last year's sales with all my shops reopened. And that's not sustainable. Like that, I can't run the company on 46% of sales. But my employees definitely could not have lived on half of the tips that they like lived on and counted on. And so the fact that they're getting paid their wage for the hours they're working, plus they're on the shared work program and they're getting, most of them are still getting the $600, like they're okay. And I'm not worried about my employees, and I have like 90 of them, figuring it out. And I'm not worried about them making ends meet, in large part because we got rid of tipping culture. And I just think it's a really good thing to think about for other businesses in the service industry for the future, because it takes this giant question mark out of your people's lives.
That is such a good point that I'm really glad you brought up. And I think a lot of people don't consider that and the way that the tipping culture plays into unemployment and the support for a lot of employees. We have one more question that was submitted that I want to get to that is also open for everybody. What did you think of the East Precinct closing, and do you feel the police should move back into the East Precinct?
Diana, will you go first?
Okay. Totally disorganized and confusing, and probably necessary to prevent any more chaos that was happening. I mean, it went on, and it was just, like I said, it was really upsetting, and we didn't know where it was going to go. It was just getting worse too. It was just ramping up. But I really feel like, at first I was like, it's kind of crazy. What if the police never came back to this precinct? Oh, that'll never happen. This has been established, and we need some sort of like gradual transition into defunding the police and everything. And the more I saw how compromised people were at CHOP, I was like, well, why not? I mean, there are so many ways that you could make people more, just have this be a lot more civilized. And I feel like even if the police don't want to turn over this precinct, somebody needs to look at an alternative location or build another location or come up with a central location that for Capitol Hill specifically, but also each neighborhood, should have community centers that are beyond just, entertainment or like exercise centers or whatever. They should have complete mental health facilities, addiction facilities, needle exchanges, whatever it takes. I mean, I just felt like it kind of opened up my mind to the possibilities about how to solve the problems. And so. Wazhma.
There's a whole series of mixed emotions about that one particular subject, and that's a constant for me. And the first piece was, it was so sudden, so unexpected, that there was definitely anxiety that it created initially, because I don't know who made the call and when they made the call. I just know that I was smack in the middle of trying to reopen my doors. I get home and they say, we're closing the police station in half an hour, and the random rumors of what could happen if they're not there. So that whole experience, I feel like, created unnecessary anxiety. And then the very next day to come and open my doors and then see that it was actually so much more peaceful was a really strange experience. Because, however I was viewing the role of the police department in terms of protecting and serving the community definitely shifted in that 24 hours. And there's other pieces. I know that this particular station does provide access for domestic violence victims, and I've only now found out that they were also, creating some space for care in certain situations. But, having been in the community as long as I have been, I had no clue about any of that. And whether it comes or it doesn't come, either way, there's a lot that has to shift around the approach to it all. I think for the most part, this particular precinct is known for a slightly better approach than some of the other places. So that's the other part that I look at. It's why is it always that everything gets pushed up to this particular neighborhood? And there's a certain perspective of protecting certain entities more than others, and that's part of what has to shift. I was here through WTO, I was here through the Occupy movement and everything else, and whenever the protests start downtown or in the middle of business centers, they just really do everything they can to push them up here. And that's part of the conversation that needs to happen too. So that's a big part of it. And then I still, it's been weeks now and I still don't know who made the call. Somebody made the call to have the police precinct move out. They had a moving van, so there was some thought to it, and I'm going, who really did, and why do they keep passing the buck? They made a plan to move out. Did they know what was going to happen after, or what they were going to do? What were the actions? To me, it was a rash decision without any forethought or long-term view of what was going to happen next. So the next part of the question, I think, is a little bit harder to answer. What need does the precinct serve, and is that need being met, is a big question. I think that's now come to be the next phase that I think I'm exploring. Was it making us safer is a question that we're having to look at. And with them not being here, are we no longer as safe is the next piece. Are people getting what they need if they call 911, right? If they are asking for help. So all those pieces are, I think, still unclear to me. So it's really hard to speak to that.
Thank you for sharing. I want to be cognizant of time. We have 5 minutes for wrapping up. And so if you all would like to share your final thoughts, and then again, one final question is, what is one thing that you would like for city leadership to hear directly from you? So if there is one thing you could share with your final thoughts, what would that be for the city leadership?
Okay, so I think my final thoughts in general are around how, and I'm trying to think of, the purpose of this rapid response around reopening on Capitol Hill. I think people need to figure out how to do business and be in community if we are battling coronavirus for like a year to 18 months still. And I think a huge part of that is being able to be outside. So the more we can all take our businesses to the streets and maybe have less traffic and more outside sidewalk cafes and sidewalk sale every day. And like, I think that's a major part of it. And it actually will create a lot of safety with just more people being out in the neighborhood outside this summer and early fall and figuring out how to get through, how to like make enough money to pay our rent and be safe with coronavirus. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the questions that have been put in the face of Capitol Hill in particular around police violence against Black bodies is something that I just hope everybody in Capitol Hill doesn't lose, even if CHOP goes away today. I think like there are organizations like Black Lives Matter, like whatever organized youth comes out of this from the CHOP, who it's a little unclear to me, like what will those organizations be and how will they continue to do the work that they've done on the ground for the last few weeks. I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP, and there have been a lot of wonderful conversations in the NAACP about what their sort of demands coming out of this movement in Seattle and Washington in particular are. And to go back to the precinct, like I think a lot of people would be okay with that precinct coming back if someone in leadership like the mayor or the chief of police said, like, we're demilitarizing police. We're cutting the budgets in these ways and we're putting money here. And just a plug to answer your question about what do I want city employees to hear is like the Jumpstart Seattle tax that Teresa Mosqueda put forward a few weeks ago has a lot of the investments that we're all asking for in the community, in small business and in community members as individuals. And I think that's the beginning of really awesome conversations about what we could look like as a city. And I hope that a much bigger cut than 5% is proposed for the 2021 police budget.
I also think that, like, just going back to what you were saying, Molly, there is a conversation to be had that the Black Lives Matter movement is about justice, right? Like that's what it's really about. It's about people feeling like their humanity is not on the line for some basic thing. Like I want my kid to be able to walk around and not feel that threat. And there has to be a shift in accountability. You know, if we don't hold accountable the people who are violating these basic oaths on every level, like, you know, that's a problem. That is the fundamental issue. We can't sit there and talk about good cops and bad cops and all the other things. That's not the issue, actually. The issue is about justice and how we can exist, you know, beyond the basic level. And even like regarding COVID, it's like, you know, we're talking about people's lives, about like taking care of each other and that being the baseline before we talk about anything else.
I think that's a really wonderful note to end on. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to say thank you so much for all of you joining this conversation and being really authentic and vulnerable and sharing your experiences. This will be recorded and available to view for any folks who would like to afterwards. And I will turn it back to Joey for more info on next week's Rapid Response.
Well, we would like to thank you all for joining us today for Rapid Response, and a big thank you to our guest panelists, and of course our guest moderator today, Christina Arrington. We appreciate your leadership and insightful perspectives. Viewers, when you log off of today's rapid response, be sure to take a moment to fill out the GSBA survey. It will be presented to you both on Zoom and Facebook Live. This will help us to ensure timely topics for our future GSBA rapid response programming. GSBA does recommend that you tune in this Thursday at 10 a.m. for our new health and wellness series, Keeping It Real with host Lindsay T.H. Jackson. This week's episode is School Still a Thing? Join us this week as we hear from education experts and local school administrators about the future of school post-COVID-19. GSBA Rapid Response, we will be taking off next week in celebration of the 4th of July holiday. We do encourage you to visit our website and take advantage of that time to go back and view previous episodes of Rapid Response. They are all located on our GSBA webinar library. Rapid Response will return July the 14th at 10 a.m. when we welcome one of the Pacific Northwest's most celebrated architecture and interior design firms, Board and Vellum, as we peek into the new normal of social distancing, what it means for your space, and strategies you can utilize to implement safety precautions throughout our phased reopenings. But for now, we wish you all a safe and happy 4th of July.